All right. I think we're streaming. Gentlemen, yeah, I think we've made contact with YouTube. All right, right on. Well, we're going to act like we have, and we're either going to talk for an hour and not have a video, or we're going to talk for an hour and have a video. So either way, welcome to Vast Vision Presents Comics Club with Brandon Graham and myself, Joseph Keatinge, where we talk about comics that we're reading from the past, present, and future. Somebody got something coming out? It's not out yet. We're going to talk about it. So anyway, we obviously have a guest. Sometimes we won't, but we thought we would kick it off with a creator that Brandon and I are both really excited about. So, you guys know Brandon? Matt Battaglia of House on Fire from Living the Line. Matt, Brandon, welcome.
Hi.
First ever Vast Vision. Dude, I'm pumped. I'm really excited about this because we've talked a lot offline. We talked a little bit on the Vast Vision Discord, which, by the way, so this is put on by Vast Vision, which is a creative community initiative by myself, Curtis Weeb, Shannon Woodhouse, Hillary Jenkins, Rob Guillory, Nick Patera, a whole bunch of people, Chris Hunt. And yeah, we have an online community. If you go to vastvisionpublishing.com, you can go there. If you just want to talk comics, talk about craft, that's what we do there. And one of the people that I've known his work before, I actually had his work before, but I've been really excited to get to know better, is Matt Battaglia. So I've been talking a lot. I want to read two things really quick, and then we'll open this up. So I have a copy right here of House on Fire. And I want to read the thing that you open with and the thing you close with. And don't worry, no spoilers for the closure. It's after that. But you have a quote here from Ephesians 6:12 you start off with. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in this heavenly realm. And then afterward, which is by you, he said, between the start of this book and the publication of it, I became a father. I remember frantically toning, lettering, cutting patches for pages, just trying to wrap it all up before she was born. It will be a long while before she can read this book. I hope that when she can, it will feel more like fiction and less like reality, and that she won't have a frame of reference for it. She'll ask what was going on, and I can reminisce about the strange, distant piece of history, and she can reply, that really happened? And till then, though, I hope that House on Fire provided you something of value, and it provides you with some sense of catharsis like it did for me while creating it. Getting a little bit into specifics of that, but I just want to say from the get-go, we're talking about this a little bit beforehand, and I didn't want to get it too much before we're actually streaming, but I found this book. Brandon and I have been talking a lot about, actually a friend of ours, Charles Brownstein, said that we needed to be doing the comics of the early, or fiction in general, of the early 20th century is all about how the world's going to drown us. And we need more work about, I'm getting that I have tremendous reverb in the live chat.
Turn off that second audio. Did you do the...
Yeah, I did. Turn it off?
That one off.
All right.
Yeah. See if that fixes it.
All right. We'll see if that fixes it. I have turned that off. It has been removed. Anyway, so hopefully any of that was useful. If not,
yeah. Well, no, you're saying you got cut off in the middle of a quote, Joe. You're talking about.
Oh yeah. So anyway, that basically the fiction of the early 20th century is all about how the world's going to drown us, and we really need to work about how we're going to swim. And I really feel that that's what House on Fire is. So yeah, Matt, I've been talking a lot. And I want to get Brandon's reaction to the work too. But can you talk a little bit about where you were when this was starting off?
Yeah, well, I sent them to you earlier today, actually, but what became House on Fire I started, I think, in May of 2020, and so trying to figure out what the book was going to be took a while, because things kept happening, and I kept trying to figure out how to turn it into a story and how to kind of put all these thoughts down on paper. The funny thing is that the quote, the Bible quote that you picked, that I put at the beginning of it, it probably was around this time in 22 that that I probably put that together. I think that well, I don't know. The years it's all blur, so it must have been 20. Whatever, it's not important. Point was, over COVID, I would record masses for the little church around the corner from our house. When they weren't allowed to have people in, and there was a reading at the time. It would have been Lent time, and it wasn't that verse. It was another one. But it was sort of in that realm, and I was looking at it, and that sort of started clicking a lot of the story components together. And yeah, I mean, that was the book sort of rolled from there, from that like 2020 thing where I kept it all set within the city, and then as time went on, and I had driven outside of Philly with my dad, down to Texas, and sort of seeing the stark difference between the way that the rest, sort of rural areas were handling the 2020 time versus Philly was, and that also started to kind of click what the story was going to become, into shape.
Okay, what specifically can you talk about specifically the differences
Yeah,
between the rural areas and city we're handling it?
yeah, it was basically the moment we got out of Philly and sort of further, we were heading towards Texas. So um, it just seemed like life was a little bit more freer. Like people were doing things and out and
Sure.
about a bit more, and so so then it became more of trying to tease out this difference between urban and rural, environments, and then obviously then all of um, the protests and the riots happened in Philly, um, and in front of the art museum for a very long time it was like a tent city, and so that was also another component of it. And then I also got jumped down at the corner of our street, and so like him getting jumped is that happened to me, and I remember texting Sean, like, because I was originally going to remove that scene from the book. Like I had it in the outline. I was going to remove it. I said, this is
Right.
kind of putting like an action violence thing in that maybe doesn't need to be in there. And then like literally a week after I told him I was going to remove it, I got jumped. I was like, okay, I'll keep it in because I can't like jinx myself further. Like, like I can't. so, so it was a lot of pulling all these things together. That was, you know, like previous drafts. I had all sorts of like drones and shit involved, and I had him like using a cell phone and like taking out SIM cards, and there was a lot more surveillancey stuff, and I cut
Sure.
all of that because I thought it was sort of distracting and kind of made it more paranoid than it needed to be.
Right. Well,
Granted, I was very paranoid.
yeah, it's interesting because there is a timelessness to it, and it's funny because the afterward you talk about the idea of your daughter seeing it in the future and hoping it's fiction. I feel like it's one of those things that if it wasn't put out when it was put out, it would seem like it could be talking about many things, you know?
Yeah, yeah, and when I first was trying to talk about it, like I specifically didn't want to like say COVID or like lockdowns or anything like that because I wanted to avoid that. But I just don't think it's avoidable when talking about anything creative about the work because it was so
Sure.
obvious. It's so much a product of that time, and I think that one of the things that frustrated me and why I wanted to make the book was that no one seemed to be taking any sort of artful tack to like discuss what was going on, and that was a real frustration for me. Where it was like post 9/11, you couldn't. Everything was tackling. Everything was trying to process that moment, and then like we had this huge, global event that no one was bothering to process artistically, and that
Yeah,
bummed
and it
me.
was a weird avoidance. Like I remember very late pandemic or kind of while we were dealing with it, watching TV shows that were obviously made in this strange environment, and even commercials that didn't seem like it was like they were made for a magical escapism world, which I
Yeah,
understand, but it felt like like kind of horse blinders in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And and even now it feels like there's a lot of stuff that like you're talking before we started recording about selling this book in an environment where you wanted to get out the artistic expression and not have to deal with like a politicized version of it. And I don't know, I guess that's one of the reasons this book is so powerful is you kind of did you made art that a lot of people were thinking about, and it's um yeah, it's an impressive feat to do something like I imagine you felt a certain amount of both pressure to do this and maybe a little bit of pressure to not do this. Like, do you feel like you're kind of pushing back from some internal ideas of like this is like a little bit of a dangerous piece of work to be making?
Uh, I think because of my actual job, I never really worried about that this is dangerous because
Okay.
I work in like the libertarian space, so I'm shielded from all the stuff we were putting out was, we were critical of everything at work, so I didn't have to worry about that. Like, I was, you know, I I guess I was worried in the sense of like, would anyone touch it? But it was
Hmm.
something that I had to make, and so like when I sent it to Sean, I already had most of the book done, at least laid out. So it was really just so there was something freeing about basically being able to send to Sean and be like, hey, if you'd like to publish it, here's the book. This is what it is. There's nothing to. I wasn't hiding anything. It was all there.
Yeah, certainly.
And
And Sean
yeah,
Michael
you had
Robinson's the
the
publisher of Living the Line, we should mention.
yes.
Yeah, publisher of House on Fire and Moonray by
Yeah,
Bret
yeah,
I'm
yeah. They're
Easton
both.
Ellis.
I'm glad
Um,
he was willing to put it out because that was probably the bigger worry was like even was just getting someone to read it,
Yeah,
um, which was a worry of mine because I knew that like a normal publisher in comics probably wouldn't touch it at the time. But like you said, if I made it pre 2020, they would have.
so what
yeah.
what part of 2020 did you start making this in, or did you make it later? Like what part of the sort of where were you at, like in your personal life? If you want to dig into it when you're decided like this is something I need to embark on.
Like I said, I think that the first pass that I had of it was in May of 2020.
Wow, so pretty
Um,
early.
yeah,
Oh.
and then the second pass was probably July 2020. Like it, but the problem was is I had all these notes written down. I had layouts. I had a couple style versions I went through, and then I went and finished up. I added like 40 pages to Ghost of the Carousel, and then I came back to House on Fire. So that was kind of the pause. Like I had an outline written, and I think that the problem was the way that I was originally trying to draw House on Fire was just trying to draw it like very tight, and that made me not want to do it. So like trying to be super precise with it, and um, it was just it made the pages too much harder to like they took longer to draw. I was doing like probably 10 panel pages or something like that, and once I changed that whole approach, it made it much more pleasant to draw and easier to draw, and I could actually finish it. And you know, I don't have that many pages under my belt, so it makes so like getting over the hump of like okay, I can finish something that's 50 pages, and then this was like 100 pages, so it was a more manageable thing at that point. And then doing
Sure.
it
Yeah. Just
super brushy.
yeah. To get into a little bit of just craft nerd stuff, like I'd be interested. What size did you draw this at? And you're doing it with a brush, you said?
Yeah, I did 11 by 14.
Okay. So about I guess shorter than a standard comic page, but just as wide.
Yeah,
Oh,
this is the
fantastic.
size that I like working at, which that doesn't help because it's on a screen. But
Yeah, but in
it's
relation to
11 by
you,
14, and I
yeah,
like
because
the
there's something
square
your
format too.
your brushwork almost it may because I've gotten all the way through the book several times. It's your brushwork almost feels like you're painting fire lines. Everyone's made out of fire almost is the kind of feeling that it gives.
Yeah.
And it has kind of an urgency to it because it looks like the lines are being put down pretty quickly.
Yeah, I mean, I ink each page in like an hour, so
Nice.
it's really I try to go. Part of it is maybe it's like covering my own art draftsman insecurities, but part of it is I thought that like going fast makes it feel more immediate, intense, and it gives it more mood, and I'm glad that
Yeah, and I think
it
that's
seems to
accurate.
have worked. So
Yeah, very much so. And did you have the thing laid out for you, like when you took a break from it, did you know the ending?
no, and the ending's funny because I had it ending. I had it ending basically 3 pages before. I had it ending on the full page of his face,
Hmm.
and then I was talking with my dad about it because I had sent him a PDF of it. I was talking with my dad about it at uh, our my the our baby shower, and he was like, "You know what you should do,"
Uh-huh.
and so those last like 3 pages were my dad's idea. He was like, "Yeah, you should have him," you know. I guess
Yeah, it's fascinating. I mean, um yeah, I guess I feel like people hopefully will people who have read the book or read it because it's fascinating that that was left behind because I mean the book feels like a setup for those pages that you did afterward.
yeah, I think I was trying to. I think he picked up on what I was putting down previously, which was everything seemed to be looping back around,
Hmm.
and my whole like the thesis for the book is that everything seems to be in this downward cycle, and just the same events kept repeating themselves over and over again, and they
Sure.
just getting a little bit stupider or a little bit worse, and so the ending, the that those final 3 pages make a lot of sense, now in a whole. I think I was probably trying to hold back from uh, making it too like having too much of a downer ending, but I think that it was kind of I think it was the right move.
Yeah, well, like Joe said before, it's like I think, especially from your point of view, it feels like a very dark book because especially if you're living in it and processing a rough time in your life. But just, I think from my point of view, it is this catharsis of like, oh, wow, somebody is talking about this in an artistic way, and it and in the your level of craft in doing it's really an uplifting book to read.
Well,
Yeah,
thank
I
you.
I left it pretty like empowered feeling. So like I think I have a feeling it sounds like that we started the pandemic and ended it in very similar places because like I we
Mm-hmm.
got my wife and I got married in January of that year, and so like
Okay.
January March everything shuts down, and then by the end of it I had a child. And there's this element that you touch on in House on Fire, where and one of the reasons I read that Ephesians quote is like in biblically speaking, talks about submitting to authorities, but that's really mistranslated a lot of the time because a lot of time the word root of that is, first thing you have a higher ideal to that, and then the things that you serve, it's not just you blindly follow, right? You're supposed to submit through the filter of these ideals, but also the duties you have. And it was a very confusing time into like for me about like how do you serve your family, and these things that maybe you don't agree with, maybe you do agree with, and maybe people are being really weird about it, even though you agree with them, and da 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 da. I mean, I don't need to get the particulars of my own personal life, but when I read this book, I was just, I mean, it is kind of a pet peeve of mine when people say like, oh, I feel so seen in this work, but I mean, to be frank, I did, and just like, and I don't think you need to necessarily be a husband or a dad to feel that with this. It's just like how do you like when you have a role, which is to in part to protect and provide for those in your life. Like, how do you do that in an extremely strange situation? Which I think is really important about the work because it's not. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. This is more of a reader's perspective, of course, but it's not really a book about COVID as much as like the
Mm-hmm.
ideologies that spin out of stuff like that. You know,
Yeah.
would you agree, disagree, and I don't know.
I agree with all that, and then my whole like I and and I noticed this in some people, and I'm glad that you guys read it and got a lot out of it, because I think you kind of have to be a. It'll sound pretentious, but you do kind of need to be an advanced comic reader to, I think, get the most out of it, because I'm asking you to actually read the pictures a lot more, and like I didn't name characters, and there's no like character development. There's not like it, because I wanted you, the reader, to be able to generally put yourself into the situation, and into the, the protagonist is an avatar. He's not, they're all thinly sketched people, but that was on purpose, because I wanted you to be able to not. I didn't want people to get tied up with like, this is this character with a name. I want them to basically put their situations that maybe they lived through into the book. And so you did need to, I think you needed to actively engage with it. And I think a lot of comics, they overwrite it, and then you can't, like, that doesn't happen with them.
Yeah, certainly. Well, and the idea of kind of being an advanced comic reader, is there any work that you were kind of pulling from? Do you think? I mean, with House on Fire, but also generally with your style, do you feel like your kind of comic uh, literacy comes from certain places?
Um, well, I read, I didn't, like, I had read Pope's, like, 100% and his Batman Year 100, like a while ago, but I had only in probably, I want to say like 2018, 2019, had started reading his THB.
Sure.
And specifically when I found the Buzz and some of his short stories in there, specifically like Smoke Navigator and things like that, it started to
Oh
open
yeah.
up the more like poetic kind of comics mindset, where like, oh, it doesn't. There's stuff in that one, and then there's stuff in that. I had then went back and was looking at the One Trick Ripoff like compilation that Image put out.
Mm.
Certainly.
Um,
And it's impressive because Pope is, I feel like, a big, I feel like when he is like he's like a concentrate artist in a lot of ways. Like
yeah,
I'm very influenced by Pope as well, and I feel like it's almost like I worry about it getting too heavy in my work. Like I avoided using a brush because I didn't like an impressive thing about your work is you mentioned Pope, and I'm like, of course, but it didn't jump to me when you said. Also, we should qualify what Buzz is because it's such an incredible book that I don't know if it's really in conversation as much anymore. At a certain point, Pope decided to do these giant-sized books that are like what two or three times up from comic book size,
it's enormous.
and Buzz is this one where he just another fascinating thing about like young Paul Pope is he would publish comics. He did this several times where he would publish an unfinished comic and be like, "This didn't really work out, guys, but here's 50 pages of a thing I started."
Yes.
And it felt like you're kind of learning with him. And Buzz has Smoke Navigator in it, which eventually became 100%.
Yes.
And but it's like it's so much more like steeped in genre and all based around this like guy dealing with this really harsh suicide of his girlfriend. And it's such a like well crafted, beautiful work that he's just like, nah, it didn't work. And then a decade later he comes back and puts out 100%, which is a lot of elements of the same story with the the kernel of the suicide just completely removed from it.
Right. Which
And
is, but you don't get it. Like, I felt like that was one of the. It takes you a couple reads to really, I don't know. Like it sinks in after a couple times. I thought, for me at least.
yeah, definitely. I mean, it's like, I mean, in similar, that one's interesting because in similar ways to House on Fire, it has this end that hits you. Like, like it's the main character is, I think his name's Johnny.
Mm-hmm.
He's just like he returns home and he's like talking. You get these flashbacks about what his girlfriend was like, and everyone's like, he's kind of, everyone's like, why did you just disappear? And he's like, I couldn't deal with it. And you're getting all these pieces of his life. And then only in the end, you see a bunch of girls at his job see him and be like, oh, he left when his girlfriend had this really dramatic suicide. And there's all these things you see. The beginning of the story starts with this really brilliant way, which is you see all these full page illustrations of like here's a bridge at night, here's just a road, and it looks like he's just doing these kind of it looks like he's just doing kind of visual masturbation of like here's these pretty images of setting a scene. But then when you hit the end of the story, it's like these are the visual images of what the main character was dealing with when his girlfriend jumped off a bridge. You get the bridge and him leaving town and just having like a gas station and a sign and all these things.
Yeah.
And it's this fascinating idea of meaningless images that then carry this huge weight once you get context. And that's something I was thinking about when you were adding the pages, is if you showed someone, so House of Fire ends with like a metaphor drawing of a literal house of fire. And if you started with it, you'd be like, House on Fire, get it. But it's like, it carries the weight of all this stuff that characters have gone through and that they're still going through at the end of the story. Yeah, so that is interesting. And
I'm glad
yeah.
you said metaphor. A lot of people took it very literally, and I was like, no.
Interesting.
But I thought that was, but yeah, that
it being literal is really funny because you're like, what else can go wrong? And then you just show the idea that it would be an explosion.
It's like, at what point did I bring any sort of like, yeah, this is going to be explosion book? Like,
yeah.
No, but that's kind of why it works for me, though. You know, like, because if you do take it literally, I mean, it is over the top, but I feel that, man. I believe me, from that period of time, other times in my life, you know, where things have, you know, seemingly spiraled out, like what could possibly go wrong next, like, you know, and you did it in such a way with the whole book where you're not beating us over the head with it. You know, I mean, it's funny you guys are talking about Pope so much because I feel like he's doing a similar thing where you kind of have to like keep up. You know what I mean? He's a little more overt with it because he'll mention like references and, you know, things like that. But
I mean, Pope is a hard one to me to deconstruct. I didn't know about like he comes from this whole Ohio school of like Milton Caniff and Jeff Smith and all these guys. And without the Caniff like missing link there, I had years of being like, where did this wizard come from? You know? And then I found Milton Caniff work, and I was like, this missing link of like, oh, this is beautiful brushwork in these well-crafted comics.
Well, I come from the New Jersey school of comics because I grew up the town next to the Joe Kubert School.
Oh, wow.
Oh, nice.
So I went to high school with his grandkids. So Emma was the same grade as she was with one of my sisters in high school, and so I used to go there on like they had like a Saturday morning sketch class. So I remember, so I read all of that stuff, and then it didn't. So when I found Pope, like all those missing links, I started to fill in eventually. But I kind of grew up on the Kubert stuff.
Yeah, was Kubert stuff the stuff, or kind of the Kubert school? Because I feel like that encompasses a whole type of comic, not just the Kubert family. Is that the stuff that can hit you early on?
But when you're 10, it just they just had like just, you know, piles of like Kubert like just issues lying around that you know, so like most of my old like comic collection was like just missing cover Kubert X-Men books.
Well, let's back up, and maybe this is the point. But one thing we talk about when we do the campfire stories thing, which I guess this is an extension of, and I'm most fascinated by, was like, what's the point of initial contact, like first contact with comics? Was it the pile of stuff in the back of the Kubert school, or what was it?
It was Transformers comics.
Oh, let's go! Awesome.
Like the Marvel stuff.
The Marvel stuff, and then like the Marvel Generation 2 stuff.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Where they're kind of like, Rob Liefeld's popular. Let's get a little bit of that going on in here. Well, foil covers for everyone. That era.
They're kind of a Rob Liefeld era style era of Transformers? I'm unaware of this.
That's
It
Generation
was just
Two, right?
an
Yeah.
yeah, the Derek Yaniger was the artist, and it was so insanely over the top and awesome.
It
Like they
rules.
just
Yeah.
had grenades and like just ammo belts, and it's like this doesn't make any sense. They're robots, but it's awesome. And he was he was a good draftsman. Like he was a good artist,
Yeah.
but he didn't finish out the series, um, which was a bummer.
So what, those at 7-Eleven
Like,
or something like that, or
huh?
where did you stumble across those?
I don't know. My dad had gotten me a like when he would go on business trips. He'd usually bring some sort of something back, and so he'd got me a bumblebee after one of them, and then I guess my grandpa was a he liked like oh, one of the World War II guy, like cartoonist guys whose name I can't think of, but he was a big, he liked those kinds of comics. So
Sure. It's hitting me right now how what a different conversation this would be if you'd made House on Fire as a film, because there's something intrinsically weird about being adults that have these tools and we're like, how did this medium first speak to you? And we're all just like, there's a duck millionaire that I read a lot of, where I feel like it's almost a disservice to the medium because I feel like if it was film, would be like, when I was first at film school and Kubrick's work hit me, and maybe that's you talking about Pope more, but
but I didn't find Pope until I was like in high school to
yeah,
college,
Yeah, but I
which is
bet if
funny.
those film guys were being honest, it would be like, well, there was this Duck Millionaire cartoon on KCAL 9,
I
you
mean,
know?
those Duck Millionaire cartoons are amazing,
Yeah,
but
they ruled.
but I would
yeah,
say though, like the bigger creative influence for me today, like all of that stuff is just finding a medium, right? Like
sure.
Yeah.
you obviously don't find film starting with Kubrick because you're 10 when you watch your first movie. Like if
Sure.
you can be the biggest film snob there is, and I'm sorry, you're not sitting through 2001. Okay, like I know that I can't sit through 2001. And I'm like I can't do that. So
I think Joe watches it every year just
I,
to
I
rub it in our faces.
I do love the movie. Although I will say, my dad tried to show it to me when I was like 9, and I freaked out so much just in the monkey scene, like at the very beginning, that he was like,
like
Yeah.
"This was a horrible mistake. We'll get back to this in 15 years."
granted,
I raised a kid that hates monkeys.
I've seen all I saw all of the the Italian classics that you need, the Godfather, all the Scorsese
Uh,
stuff at a far too young age, but that's culture, and as a paisan you kind of have to watch that early on. But with like how I can't even remember where it was going. House on Fire was more like music. I think has more in is more how I'm trying to think of comics.
Oh, interesting.
Just because I don't really want to make like a series. I don't want to do I'm not trying to do monthly comics or anything. So like thinking about each sort of graphic novel as sort of a thematic thing is more where my head is at. So thinking of it more probably how people would think of an album or something, which I know is something I've seen. I guarantee I saw that in a Pope interview or something. But like
I
that
know
clicked
Pope's
with
talked
me.
about Escapo as just like putting out a almost like a single that would last by itself.
Yeah,
But I feel like that's a really good tool for like escaping the velocity of um like it's comics is such an amazing medium that I think to be adults in requires a certain like we love a millionaire duck, but to talk about serious adult things sometimes, and the nerve of me talking about this when everything I do is so steeped in ridiculous imagery, but I do think there is an element of like almost having to find a way to escape a lot of the weight of what is thought of culturally as a comic book if you're going to approach it as an adult.
yeah, that's a hard thing. It's like how do you? And then it's not like most comics readers seem to. It's hard to be like, no, like give it a shot. Like you can be an adult in this medium still. Like I know that
Yeah,
you fell in love with it because you liked watching cars turn into robots and blow each other up, and that's fun and all that. But you know, people like engage with adult movies even though they started watching TV shows about Scrooge McDuck. like you every other medium there's this expectation that you grow up in it, and then like you find new adult expressions in it, and then comics is always hard to shuffle people along that path for some reason.
Yeah, I don't know though.
Yeah,
Like,
so
I'll push back just a little bit because I mean, I think that's part of the beauty of it. Like, I'm really blessed in that the comic store that I grew up. One of the comic stores I grew up with was Heidi Ho Comics in Santa Monica, one of the best stores of all time. Um, and it was great when I was going because it was so disorganized and everything was piled in. It was like the 80s and 90s, right? So everything was disorganized. And so Rob Liefeld was right next to Hugo Pratt, which was next to Robert Crumb, which was next to Moebius, which was next to Eric Larson. You know what I mean? Like there was no, which was next to manga, you know, like next to Tomo and Lone Wolf and Cub and all that kind of stuff. So there was, to me, it was just like, this is all comics, you know? And so like, I still think those Transforming Robot comics are pretty badass. But you know, this it resonates with me in a very different way, of course, than you know, Corto Maltese or some like House on Fire. You know, like I don't I never stopped reading well, it's actually true. I stopped reading comics right before 2020. Then I got or 2019, and I got back into it then. But that was a whole other thing. Um,
that's interesting, Matt.
yeah.
Was there a period that you stepped away from comics and thought about, like, has this always been kind of your trajectory to tell stories with pictures?
I did a monthly comic for Z2 with Mike Morisi called Indoctrination, and that I did that in maybe 2015, 2016. And after doing that, I like didn't draw for a while.
Yeah.
I hated the work that I put out. Um, I I didn't like it at all, and and you know what? And I also hated the whole the entire mindset that I was stuck in, which was that like, oh, you got to make like a pitch package, and then you got to
Sure.
pitch it, and you have to try to get a publisher, and you have to like try to figure out what other people want. I'm like, it just sucked, and it's not something that it and it wasn't like you were making enough, like nothing that it wasn't replacing my job,
Right.
but then so you're not having fun doing it, and it wasn't like, so yeah, that sucks. So after that I stopped, and and it wasn't until I did Ghost of the Carousel, that which was just, I did that as a mini comic just for my like, the first part of it was a mini comic that I just did, and then I was just before I got married, and I was like stressed out about stuff, and so I was like, I put that down on paper, and then I was like, oh, this is like, I finally figured out how to make the medium be like a actually make it like a form of expression for me, instead of being like I'm trying to tell some sort of like this meets that story, which is always how everyone like gets you in that pitch mindset, where it's like it has to be uh, you know, this movie plus this movie equals this new book that I'm pitching you, and therefore you have an audience for it. And
Yeah, that's interesting. It's reminding me, I had a moment with my book King City where I hit a wall with comics as well. And that book was literally just me saying, well, nothing I'm doing is working on a financial level. I'm going to do exactly what I want, and almost like an aggressive, like, screw you guys, this is my thing. So, what do you think it almost is like? I mean, it almost sounds like you have to reach an artistic rock bottom and pick up the pieces, if not
yeah,
to sound too dramatic.
possibly. I would say though, I mean, not to be like uh, a kiss ass here or anything, Brandon, but like remember reading. I mean, and like Island when that was coming out, and that changed my perception of comics, like what it could
That's
be.
cool.
And like, um, even like multiple warheads and stuff, like just because you were dealing with other, um, it was just outside of the bounds, So like so I feel like, as you guys and Joe like ringside did this too, where it was like you're showing like this doesn't you don't have to be in this lane of like this very narrow lane, and I and it wasn't until like I started seeing more of these and really when I found like Buzz and the THB stuff more recently is when I finally
Yeah.
was like, oh, okay, this is how to this is how to make this thing. And like because Ghost of the Carousel was like to me the closest to like a music thing because there's really very little in it, but I feel like the pictures wise it's pure expression, and House of Fire is a little bit more narrative but it's still very expression. And the next thing I'm working on is a little bit more narrative, but like there's a lot of like rage and frustration in it.
Certainly, yeah.
So
I'm interested in what are you looking at specific musicians when you're thinking about this stuff?
uh
Like this is like is there an album that you're connecting with
no,
while
it's
reading the
it's
work?
uh it's mostly like it's I don't like I know a lot of people put up like playlists together for their books or whatever, and mine is always just whatever I'm it's more I think the idea of like the album. Obviously, you know, grew up in New Jersey, Bruce Springsteen, very important to me.
Sure.
So, you know, but you think about the way that he put all of his, you know, pre-reunion records together, and I would say up through Magic, like there's a pretty clear theme for each one, and there's a story that each one's kind of telling, um, and that was, I mean, House on Fire. I think a lot of like Ghost of Tom Joad was in my head, like that
Okay.
record, because each song is very story focused, but there's a very clear like emotion to them. You know,
Okay. I was thinking Nebraska for some reason.
well, Nebraska too, but you know, everyone says Nebraska, so
I that's because I'm an amateur at the boss and that's I'm like
I mean,
yeah.
yeah.
Oh, nice. Yeah. Um,
um, but yeah, that so that was I think that's where um, you know so yeah, I think that like trying to because all the like music always feels like very expression based, like it's very
mhm.
emotional, it hits you kind of in a way that it's really hard to do sometimes with comics, I think, just because I think the way that people read them, like it's hard to break them out of like the mindset of like movie in picture form. So
Yeah, and I feel like we're hitting definitely a theme of talking about of finding your own way and kind of breaking out of things that are almost put on you to figure out how to do expression.
yeah,
Yeah, I feel like a lot of comics, especially coming out of COVID, were very much of the moment, whereas I feel like yours is of your moment. Like, and then it's funny because then I think that has more of an eternal reverberation that people like myself, and it sounds like Brandon can then read and be like, I understand, even though this is from Matt's specific perspective. I can relate to that more than I can than someone trying to tell me like this is what everything means right now, you know, and very much like this is what March 2020 means right now, as opposed to like, okay,
yeah.
well, how do you take this personal expression and then make that more of an eternal thing, you know?
I
Yeah, it's hard
think
to get past the noise because like I'm trying to push back a little bit of my cynicism of I keep I've been calling this an anti-art era
uh,
in a lot of ways and I feel like there's this like I've had to figure out ways to separate myself from like like the experience of comics as a medium and how the dumb noise of comic books as a community are such completely different animals. I had this really early on in comics. I had this idea of like how difficult it is to when you're in that mindset of like I got to pitch a thing, I got to get in this of separating this thing that brought me a lot of pain with my favorite thing to do with my time, which is making comics, and this just hitting the wall and not and not working. And yeah, and so I feel like that. I mean, maybe it's almost like a pressure cooker to put out work like you're making.
I
But I
think
don't know. Were
so.
you feeling any of that at all, or is it
Yeah, no, I've found that the couple times now that I've actually completed a comic, um, it's a this is a thing that I keep coming back to, and that I can't not like I have to do it. Like
okay?
once it's like a compulsion, then it's like okay, I'm gonna finish this thing, and which isn't you know again is like sort of probably it doesn't work from a commercial standpoint. I don't think to, but or it whatever. But you know what I mean, like where it's like
Yeah.
it's hard to put out something, you know, super frequently if you don't have this burning desire to do it, to do a story. But I think it makes better stories if you actually are like, oh, I find like I have this thing that I need to get out, and I'm not going to stop until it's done. Um,
Certainly.
and that was again like for just being able to make the book was the most freeing thing to be able to just be like, I'm just going to make this thing because I have to. And then when I felt like when I was, you know, when Sean helped me, I'd asked him about some pre-press stuff for Ghost of the Carousel, and he, you know, he had read it and he liked it, and he asked if I had anything else, and like I was like, well, yeah, I actually do. I was already doing this thing because I had to do it. Like I have no
Yeah.
plans of what to do with it. It's just I need to get it out because it's been gnawing away at me for, you know, a year basically, and so um and that's what this next thing that I'm working on is also like I've done a couple versions of it, and now I'm finally like in the, you know, in the weeds of making it. So
Yeah, that's a really interesting process thing because you've shown me some of the layouts on the new thing, and I got the impression you were starting it and then scrapping it and returning and doing new
uh,
entirely new layouts.
yeah, it was originally like a fantasy setting, and then I was like, we're in Vermont in the wintertime and driving back down here, and I was like, nah, this needs to be like colonial. And we watched The Patriot. Like
Uh-huh.
my wife's entire family was like the question of like, are like top five movies, and her siblings both all were like, yeah, The Patriot definitely in there. I was like, I like that movie, but like, how did you all like? You all were like, yeah, this is a top five. Like,
Fascinating. I have a Me and my girlfriend every 4th of July try to watch um a very early American movie, and The Patriot was one of our things. And that I'd never it was kind of it's a fun movie. It was kind of silly because I mean Mel Gibson, I he does some of like Apocalypto is one of my favorite movies
uh,
ever. And that thing is brilliant, I think. And and to connect that to the to the Patriot, so it does feel like it's like Independence Day, the Will Smith movie of the founding
yeah.
fathers almost.
Mm-hmm.
Did
But it,
you?
you know, watching it, we watched it when we got back from that trip, and I was watching it again, like not to do the as a dad thing, but I'm going to do the as a dad thing. Is like all of his kids die. It's a really sad
All right.
movie when you watch it, like, and it's like, you know, when you're in high school, it, it's a fun action movie,
Mhm.
and then when you're an adult, you're like, this is really kind of brutal and
If
sad.
I'm remembering correctly, he murders several British soldiers with an American flag.
Yeah, yeah, he does. At that point, you're so far to the end, but like it. Uh, so I kind of like just wanted to make. I want to make like feel bad action movies where it's like I don't know, violence isn't. It's not great. It's
Right, but
so
it's
funny how
certainly
so much of the medium like revolves around like people need to kill each other, and like that's why like I wanted in House on Fire. Like an original previous draft was like it was going to be like a triumphant, like after he gets, you know, mugged, like this triumphant, like he's going to murder like six people.
uh,
And then after I like I was like, that's insane. Why? That's not like fun. Like that's
uh,
not cool. You don't want that on your
interesting.
conscience.
Yeah,
Like
yeah, and that's such a completely like if House on Fire was a action revenge thing, it would be like I could see it even starting from the same emotions, but have it being a completely different animal.
like he turns into John Wick at that scene was like how I had originally like written it, and then
Interesting.
like what the fuck, like that doesn't make sense.
Yeah,
Right.
in a way
Something.
though, it's even more brutal the way you have it though, because it's not this
Yeah.
giant like cartoon, you know, violence thing. Like you really sit in that moment, almost literally, because he's sitting
Yeah.
down and he's just like, oh man. Yeah.
Yeah, and it does make me think of like, and it's interesting that happened that you dealt with people being violent with you because that's really grounded my work in a weird way sometimes where the times in my life when I've been in like physical altercations suck so bad that it really damaged a lot of my ability to for fun action in my work sometimes. You know.
Yeah. But your work is, the sci-fi element allows you to have a little bit more fun, I think.
Yeah, yeah,
Than
and I
even
know
like, I feel like at the beginning of Moonray, it's sort of that like contemplative, like sort of action where there's a reluctance and there's the violence in that book.
yeah, yeah. There's always, I mean, I feel like that in some ways that's my relationship to comic books is reluctant violence because it is a powerful storytelling tool too.
Yeah, yeah,
So yeah,
you really need it.
I'm glad that you found a way in House of Fire for it to really like um resonate with the theme because yeah, it's a fascinating thing, the idea of removing that from the story too.
Hmm.
Like it
Yeah,
would,
would it have worked without it though?
I mean, I have faith that it's yeah, it's difficult because it's such a it works so well that it's hard to imagine. Um, kind of on the side, I've been listening to the audiobook of William Burroughs. It's a really good title. It's called Soft Machine.
Okay,
Uh, and it's not a good book. I don't recommend it. It's basically just gay
okay.
porn for hundreds of pages because it's Burroughs, and that's a whole other topic. That's saying that nobody's just like this is here's this naked lunch. Everyone read as a teenager and be like, this is a weird book. But so the process that he made it though is he made this. I'm getting off the rails here. He made this thing that he was called the Word Horde over a couple of years, where he wrote 1,000 pages of these stories. And then with Naked Lunch and Soft Machine, he and a third book that I forget the title of, he just chopped up this 1,000 page thing and made these books that when you read them will dramatically shift between what's happening because he's literally just like cutting a paragraph out and pasting it in. And so it got me thinking about if this is possible with comics, and House on Fire reads um so complete that it would be a really interesting storytelting technique to make a version of it where you remove that element because I feel like it would like I feel like that you it would feel like it was missing something.
Yeah,
So I mean, I have faith that you would have figured out another story beat that kind of resonated in that way.
yeah. I don't. I feel like if I removed it, it wouldn't have like the whole like fallen world wouldn't have come like you wouldn't have felt like this was a really desperate situation as much. Like I would have
Right.
had to have an altercation when he came across the tried crossing the border, you know, and that and again like in one of the early drafts, like the idea was going to be he got into the shootout in the parking lot and he was going to go crossing the border and he was going to have to like crash through it and like drop the meds off on the side of the road and he'd have to like try to veer off into the woods and they'd chase him down and he'd get into a shootout with like guards and stuff and it's like this
Sure.
is so freaking complicated, I'm never gonna draw it and it's ridiculous, like it was gonna end like at the end of like True Detective season 2 with Colin Farrell's character, like that kind of thing where like
Okay.
they surround him in the woods or whatever. I'm like, this is part of the editing process for me is also like there's the mental editing of like that sounds great in my head, but then you think about like I gotta draw all that. No way, I don't want to do that.
Right.
And then
That's a
you
really
know,
cool statement on kind of comics as a medium too, because it's like it's not just I want to tell a story, it's figuring out the mechanics of how you show it in this medium.
yeah, and like what like at least I'm still at this point where I also have to think about like can I conceivably do it? Like I want to be able to finish the story, so I don't want to, I don't mind challenging myself a little bit, but like I want to make it so it's something that I feel like I can complete. Because if I can't complete it, then like what's the point? Like I don't want to set something in a city and try to have to draw a city a lot because that'd be
Certainly.
exhausting. Like I'm
Can
not
I get you
Sean
to
Gordon Murphy where I can just kind of crap out a city on a panel and take like with ease.
certainly, yeah, but I wonder I'm getting the idea that you're kind of starting an idea and reworking it with the idea of what you can do is part of how you almost add value to the work. You got almost it feels like you're boiling it down. Is that
Yeah,
what
I
it's like
mean,
from your point of view?
yeah, and I do all the layouts in Procreate on the iPad, so I can kind of you can look at them all in the grid, and then you can kind of see like, oh, is this flowing together? Because I try to think of things in scenes, and then like I keep going back and like adding pages, and then being like, well, this needs a little bit more room. Like a lot of the splash pages in the book are sort of just like, well, this needs another beat for the reader to kind of. I want you to pause for a moment and hopefully look at this page for a little bit before you move on, because I want you to kind of think about what you just saw. Like especially after um, I think after he pulls the gun, I was like, I don't know. I want you to kind of like there's the double page splash,
Oh yeah.
like the two splash pages there before the sound effect page, and then you go in here. But like the idea was that I want you to, I would like you to stop and think for a moment and like kind of like sit in that silence for a beat. And those two
Certainly.
pages weren't in there originally. Like I added those in.
Was Frank Miller ever an influence on your stuff? I'm seeing a little bit
Oh,
of that in some of your action.
100%.
Yeah, I was gonna say,
Absolutely.
and that bang sound effect. I was gonna ask about that.
That's a total Millerism,
Yeah.
Yeah.
isn't it? Yeah. Uh, the yeah, Dark Knight Returns. I read that at an impressionable age. Um, I had a neighbor who I had just read Garth Ennis's like and Steve Dillon's Welcome Back Frank graphic novel,
Mhm.
and I was showing it to a neighbor, and you know the older, and he was like, "You think that's cool? Well, when I was a kid, Frank Miller did this Batman book, Dark Knight Returns. You need to get that." And then I went and got that, and I was like, "Oh, that's awesome. He's old and he's badass. And he shoots this guy with an M60. That's cool." Like, and that was when I found him, and then I went and obviously went down that rabbit hole. And I think that at the Kubert School they had some pages from that Yellow Bastard in the office,
Oh, nice.
which was pretty sweet. And
Yeah, Miller
that's
stuff is so well crafted in a way.
yeah.
I read just like a Wolverine comic he did at one point that I didn't know existed a couple years ago, and just I couldn't get over how succinct and good it was.
Yeah. Well, and he also did the thing with the Sin City books where he would add, because I think he thought a lot about pacing with those, and
Hmm.
that was something um that's something that I try to think about a lot, is like how does it flow, and like some of it maybe is also because I do video editing, is thinking about things in that sort of sense of scenes and stuff, and the way that I cut and add is I guess more the same way that you kind of do in video. But
Do you ever find yourself rearranging pages to different, like
mhm.
the layouts of different sections? Because that feels much more like an editing thing.
Yeah, I mean a lot of it's just shuffling things around. I do
Hmm.
that. Um, I generally just work off of a very. I think I do like I have like a grid template that I use, just because I don't like to have to make, like I like to keep everything in a specific in a grid, so that way I don't have to. I don't want to make that's like one decision that I don't have to make, and I feel like it makes the storytelling a lot quicker and easier if you're not
Are you
like.
writing it all in notebooks or typing anything before you're doing
No,
layouts?
no, I just do a bullet point list, and
Nice.
then that's it. And then like it's just this happens, like just the basic idea of scenes, and then I just start laying the book out.
I find that to be, I do that as almost a secondary process because I find it to be a reminder to get all the junk out of the way. And
Mm-hmm.
it's almost like a thing for me of being like, okay, what has to happen? Because you'll start to feel like you're juggling chainsaws, and then I'll just try to be like, okay, all this is superfluous. What needs to happen for the scene to work? And then I do the
Yeah.
bullet points. And so it's probably smarter to start with that.
Well, so like if I start with the bullet points and I just draw when I'm drawing the layouts, like I'm drawing the basic beats of the
Mhm.
scene, and then I'll go in and be like, well, this this scene needed to be 10 pages long or whatever, and then add those.
When you're doing your layouts, are page turns a concern at all?
Um, Not yet. They will become one in this one with the one that I'm working on now, and they are once I put it all into InDesign, I can look at the page turns, but it's hard to know if I keep adding pages earlier, and that's another thing where it's like you just throw a splash page in to fix the turns too, you know.
Yeah, certainly. Actually, Joe was kind of the person that introduced the idea of page turns being something that anyone thinks about to
They're
me.
kind of important.
Yeah, they're very important, and I went through because Joe, you got that from, was it Larson that you learned that from?
Eric Larson, 100%. Like I got that from Breeding Savage Dragon, and like he was the master at the right hand page cliffhanger and the left hand page like surprise or new element to it. And just thinking the comics is like, because I while I'm personally my work's kind of getting away from it, like I do really like the 20-page, 22-page like single issue, and like think of that as a whole unit that you read. And like for a long time, really through Ringside, I guess, or to like my work from 2018, think of it as those units to be read and page. It's just surprising to me to hear you don't think of that because those two double page spreads in specific were extremely. I mean, in that case, it's a necessity for obvious reasons, but like it really, I mean, the combination of the scene, the general city scene, and then the bang was, I thought, incredibly effective page turns, and that you can't really read that digitally. It doesn't read as well. So, but I was like,
Oh no, they're
paper thing.
I would say those were definitely thought. Like I guess when I'm drawing the layouts, I don't think of page turns until I put it all into like the PDF, like the InDesign file, and then I can look at where the page turns are actually falling, and then I will edit things to make the page turns work because I ultimately want people to read in print, not on PDF.
So, process, bullet points, layouts, InDesign, and then you're inking.
Yeah.
Oh man, that's a wild way to work. How did you develop that?
Laziness.
Lazy.
I hate penciling. And I hate writing.
So you're printing out your InDesign documents onto paper and then light table them or something?
Yeah, I just do the printout in like blue ink, and then yeah, ink on top.
Okay.
But yeah, and I letter it in InDesign, which was another Sean production trick, which was why would you letter in Illustrator? You have to make like 50, you have to make a file for each page when you just
Yeah.
on InDesign. I was like, that's brilliant. I never.
We should talk about how you met Sean and kind of his involvement in the book. 'Cause that's interesting. Keep kind of talking about.
Yeah, I do. To keep. Well, like I said, like I think I found the Strange Death of Alex Raymond Kickstarter, and then I found his he had done like some articles, or he did an interview, I think, on with Jim Rugg
Sure.
on the channel that I guess shouldn't be named now.
Stop. Cartoon is kayfabe. It existed. You watched it. Let's move on.
Thank you. I had to do it. But so he had talked about how he did the Zipatone stuff, and I had asked, I think I emailed him, or I just made a comment on the YouTube video, and he responded. And so because I was trying to get it to, I for Ghosts I did some like actual Zipatone on the pages, and I was trying to get it to come out to look right in the scans.
Okay.
To print nicely, and that was it. And then we started talking from there. So it was the easiest. I mean, he's great to work with, and he helped with, because I wanted to do the tones, but I didn't really want to do them digitally because I felt like the tones would be like, if I did it all digitally in House on Fire, it would. I just wanted everything to be as like on paper as possible.
Mm-hmm.
And but I didn't want to do them on the ink pages because I was afraid I'd screw them up.
Sure.
So So he said, we'll just do it on like tracing paper on top, and then scan it in, and we'll assemble it, and that'll be better for reproduction anyways.
Were
So
you doing it in orange or was it all like ink wash?
I did it in orange. I got an orange
Yeah.
ink. Um, but we replaced it with, and this is the thing. The one thing that sucked on the production end was when we went to print was like, you know, just after Adobe dropped like the Pantone license. So I had
Mm.
picked out a Pantone color, and of course, could no longer use the Pantone books in InDesign, and so the color in the book isn't the color that it was supposed to actually be. It was supposed to be a little bit of a brighter orange, and yeah, that was the one snag we hit.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean,
Interesting.
he the thing that was great with Sean was like, because Sean's a good cartoonist, is he actually was able to give me notes on some pages, and like I redrew some stuff to fix it. Um, and you know, I think that it's uh, and then he helped with all the press stuff and all that, so it was great.
Yeah, it's such a beautiful book in the end. Like, were you when you're working on it all, are you thinking about the physical object of
Mm-hmm.
how big it'll be? And
Yeah, I wanted it to feel manga sized, because I feel like in like book size, I don't I like the bigger size for certain books. But it always drives me nuts trying to travel with comics in my backpack. Like if you're going somewhere, because they're so big,
sure.
and you can only bring so many because they're so big, and like like I mean the problem with manga is they're too thick, and then like you know you try to carry around bring like the Lone Wolf and Cub book with you. Good luck, you fit one of them in your backpack, and oh, I'm talking about the omnibus ones, the
Yeah.
real thick guys.
Yeah, I was
Yeah, I mean
gonna
those
say
ones are
I love
those
those.
weird like Gideon Bible Lone Wolf and Cubs are such a strange.
Yeah, but when you got a pack for your family and your kid and
Yeah.
stuff like that, and you have like X amount of room for your book, that's one of the reasons why I read those mass market paperbacks now. You know, and
Yeah,
I don't touch a giant hardcover because I'm never gonna have a situation where I can take it anywhere. You know.
yeah,
Right.
it's the worst.
Yeah. So
You
Yeah,
gotta
Lone Wolf and Cub also. I see some Lone Wolf and Cub in your work, Matt. Is that
Yeah, I mean, I like this. Like, I feel like he draws at such speed, and that was something that I really like. That whole book is so expressive, feeling the lines and everything, and that's what I think that I gravitate towards and react the most to now with the things I'm reading is like I want to see the artist's hand as much as possible, and um, that's something that you find in a lot of indie books, you know, where you can see like that a person drew it, like a real human being, and
sure?
like and that's something where I know that I do have digital as part of my process with the layouts and stuff, but um I could never finish anything digitally because it's so hard to commit to a line, you know, because you can constantly endlessly sort of erase and redo.
Yeah, the undo button is such a bizarre thing. Like yeah, I also work on paper and color digitally, but yeah, I hate the idea of being unable to undo a line because the fear of
Yeah.
of it is so important to me of just like it's funny to explain it as like a positive fear sometimes like drawing a big curve for me and it's just like hold your breath we're
Right.
gonna do this right.
I do the thing where I keep holding my shoulder or something, like it's like a weird nervous tick or something, but like it's
I have
it's
sounds. I
so
have
much better.
specific sounds I make for specific things I'm trying to draw. At this idea of like, it's like it's like an Alan Moore magic where I'm trying to will things into existence almost. Like this line's gonna go. Here we go.
You find yourself lightheaded because you just like holding your breath constantly.
Oh, that line would have to be so long. Yeah.
The yeah, I it you know, and it's also this well I have the yeah, I just like doing the paper thing and just seeing. I feel like you can just tell when someone like is really I don't know, cartooning the heck out of something and like really drawing, and I don't know. It's there's a polish that's expected on a lot of in a lot of comics that I find is sometimes, you know, makes them less interesting because they're so sort of like unapproachably like perfect
I feel like
in
that's
a way. Like,
permeating everything right now. Like,
yeah,
I really love, and janky Star Wars is like I call it, like the like. For instance, when I was starting to plan out which movies to show my son, I was like, okay, I'm gonna get Star Wars on VHS, not because of Han shooting first or whatever, but like I kind of wanted to seem like this artifact from
right.
this janky side of the galaxy, before they perfected it, and when it was just a bunch of guys in a warehouse in San Mateo or wherever they were, or Santa Rosa or wherever, and it felt handmade, and that also had a impact on like your appreciation of the work,
Mm-hmm.
and that was another thing that was so refreshing about House of Fire. I think is so beautiful about Brandon's work as well, because like you guys are on board in an era where so many people are digital, and there's great comics being done digitally. I'm not knocking it, but you can tell when something is done by hand. Like Pope's come out a lot in this conversation, and it had a really impactful moment. I don't remember, it was 10 years ago or so. There was an art exhibit of like Batman's 75th anniversary at the Cartoon Art
Mm-hmm.
Museum, and there was a year 100 page there, I believe, or Batman in Berlin, one of the two. And
I have two Berlins above me, by
the
the way.
page was so
Okay.
big.
Yeah.
It was like original, like golden age art size. It was like the whole entire Bristol paper. So
Yeah, yeah, that
Hang this one, but that's how big they are.
wow, yeah, that's what I'm talking about. Look at that. That's beautiful,
huh.
man.
I'm kind of like I'm doing a book I'm working on. I'm drawing gigantic, and I keep thinking like it takes me so long to do a page that big.
Are you
Probably
using the
because
same tools?
no, I'm an idiot. I'm doing it in Micron Pigma pens.
Jesus. That's why.
Yeah, but brushes are interesting. You mentioned Sean and Carson putting out Strange Death of Alex Raymond with Sim,
Hmm.
and one of the things that comes up in there, I think Sim talks about. Is that he talks about, I think it was Alex Raymond or one of the old school cartoonists, newspaper cartoonists, talking about the brush being a almost like a lazy man's tool because you
Yeah.
have to work quickly. And I think with Raymond, at some point Sim figured out that he was sharpening his brush on the page and using it to make marks. Like he would do shadows, which was him rolling the brush in the shadow so he could keep working faster, and that kind of urgency
Yeah.
of the brush is really cool. And I'm gonna do a brush comic someday. I just have to get over
I,
the fear of me
I would
some
love to
kind of
see
book that
it.
looks like a Pope fan comic when I do it.
I doubt it though. Like I don't know, your style is so the way that you draw and the shapes that you make. Those aren't going to go away when you if you switch your tool.
Yeah, yeah, I think you're right. I think at this point, my style's heavy enough, but yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, brushes are, and I use a brush sometimes for certain things too. It's like I'm not doing a giant black cape or something and scratching the every line out.
Well, how do you? So if you're the thing would terrify me about working at that size is trying to roll panel borders and like actually like 90% of the reason I like printing out the layouts is because I don't have to roll panel borders or like figure out where the panels are and like measure things.
Hmm.
Using a T square on a on the page just never seems to work for me.
Oh, interesting. Yeah,
I
I
can
don't.
never figure that out.
I do a lot of shaky. I feel like panel borders are very forgiving in a lot of ways too.
Hmm.
And I do curved edges oftentimes,
Yeah,
which
but
means,
even like laying them out, like how do you even space them?
I mean, isn't a lot of it just? Are you thinking about the gutters?
Yeah, the gut, like just getting a consistent gutter,
The
just
more I think about that, the more insane I go. So I change it from page to page as
okay.
because
That's funny.
I know that because you can get in your head and be like, I need to make the gutters on this. And I do a lot of, like for lettering, it's something I think about it a lot, especially when I'm hand lettering. I'll look at a print comic and be like, about twice as big as this is how I want to do it on the size I'm drawing.
Uh-huh.
And so I suppose you could just find a template page comic that you like the gutters for and be like, okay, I'm just going to blow this up to this thing and have like a gutter guide. But
Yeah.
I, I'm of the mindset that there, if you can get away not overthinking something, then that's even better. I
That's
would,
why I will never go bigger than my printer.
I mean, you can always tape 2 pages together, right?
That's, I'm lazy. That's with comics. I am with making comics. I want to go the path of least resistance so I can actually finish.
Sure. Because I work on paper, I end up doing a lot of paste in panels. So I'll have a
Okay.
page, I'll mess up a panel and I'll
And
just
paste it.
put an X through it and then just draw it again on another piece of paper and scan it and piece it together.
I did do a lot of that with House on Fire with a lot
Yeah.
and the fixes. Like I would even just I have a sheet somewhere in my the drawers back there where it's just heads that are just then that I put into the book like just redrawn heads constantly throughout the place.
Oh yeah. I end up doing sound effects a lot of time on other sheets of paper because you want to do them messier and faster sometimes if you're
Mm-hmm.
having just a sound.
Yeah,
Um, yeah.
yeah,
So was the lettering in this done digitally?
yeah. Sean made a font for my hand lettering,
Oh yeah,
which
Sean made a font for my hand lettering as well.
yeah, yeah, it helps a lot.
Yeah.
Um, that I find that the lettering is like the worst thing on my wrist. Like I
Sure.
for some reason just the way that I feel like when you get to like lettering, or at least when I do, it's not even like you're not writing. Just I don't know. My hand goes into this super stress mode where I don't know.
Right,
It
we are
just doesn't.
drawing out letters, right?
Yeah, yeah. You're not writing because I mean, also part of it is the last thing I did in that book was write any of the dialogue. Like there was no dialogue written.
Were the
So
balloons on the art?
on like a couple pages at the beginning of the book, because I had the bright idea that I just draw the balloons on the page. I didn't know what was going to go in the balloons, but I just put them on the page, and then I'd have to fill them later.
I do that way too often these days. Sometimes because I have uh, yeah, my process sometimes is just having a bullet or someone says something here and I'll flip the page over and write it down. Maybe they say something like this, and then
Yeah,
I won't think about it until the lettering stage.
no, I
So I guess I'm jealous of your style of doing the balloons in here because it works stylistically where you could say one word or a sentence in there and the just the circular balloons you're doing kind of are very forgiving.
yeah, I did them. Those I drew like I did. So I drew the balloons on page. Like I basically made a template in Illustrator of like balloons that I drew on a piece of paper, scanned in, and like vectorized them, and then I would bring them into InDesign. Um, yeah, I like the circle balloon. I think that you can. There's on this page like you can tell like when I repeat them because like there's this little like double line, and then that one that one will show up a couple times, but I
Oh,
always
like you
try
have
to
just several ones you're reusing.
yeah, I always try to rotate them and spin them around each time I used them, so that way like it didn't look like I was just recycling the same balloon a bunch of times.
I imagine you're the only one that notices it all.
I'm sure.
Yeah, because I have a thing. I lettered. So sometimes I'll letter other artists' work that I write, and like my friend Sure shows in the back has been Moonray. I'll letter
Mm-hmm.
his ones, and because I wasn't smart enough to do what you did and just do the circular ones, I had just have sheets and sheets where I'll go and just do balloons for every page.
Jeez. Yeah, I um that's crazy.
Yeah, I
The
need to know.
the but having the font though is because I don't like the I don't like just pulling off a font from a font site to use because I just don't think that it ever merges in with the art correctly. Like it always
Sure.
just looks like a font. And if um and so I'm not gonna like uh so I just felt like having the hand lettering font made it so it all feels like a piece, whereas if I used like a font from a site, it just never would have clicked in correctly. Because I've tried that on other like kind of comics that I've done, and
Sure.
it I don't know, it always looks like it's sort of separate from the artwork, and it happens more now with like digital stuff, just because even the way that the again, this is like a credit to Sean and like the production stuff. Like sometimes the blacks of the lettering is different than the black of the line art, and then it looks really weird to me. Like, because then again, this is only stuff that like complete nuts like us would notice, but it's the things that like you think about. I just noticed that this copy, the the crop is bad on some of these pages, and it was driving me nuts. So I was flipping it through it.
It looks lovely on my copy. So great. Um, yeah, I will say that working with Living the Line and Sean is kind of changed because I was already getting into my head about production on my last on my
Green light
Randall
cameras.
Howard. Yeah, the because I was Trisha Ramos was doing the production of that at Image, and so and she's a friend of mine, so I was working pretty closely with her and trying to basically one of my current things in how I make comics is I try to make the production artist that I'm working with's job less of a hassle, which
Mm-hmm.
for decades I was unaware was anything. Like I was just turning in pages and like, you guys have sent it to the printer now, not realizing there's a step where people have to make things printable.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like
Yeah.
and so minor things where I'm doing like how I color pages has changed because I don't want Sean to have to go in, leave his children behind crying for their father and go in and fix my things that I could have just done quickly and how I changed the thing. Is there anything that you learned working with Sean that affected your process?
The whole way that he does treat has you treat the line art
Hmm.
was really interesting, um, and it once you see it printed, it's like, oh wow, that's super sharp. That looks better than it looked like on my on the artboard. And like when you first scan it and you do like his little, he gave me like a script to run, and you look at it, you're like, okay, and then you see it printed and you're like, all right, that looks awesome. Like he and then the biggest thing that he introduced me to was the lettering and InDesign, because that just
Hmm.
saves so much time and helped me be able to see the whole thing at once without doing a lot of efforting. I do like, I have a graphic design background, and I've like worked done a lot of print design work before, but I also usually there's was a buffer between me and the printer, and that once when you kind of learn all, like Sean knows so much more about dealing with printers and getting out of printers what you want, and it really helps. I mean, I thought that Moonray printing it on a matte stock, like that looks so good. Like you're
Certainly.
I
Yeah.
it looks so much better than it would have been on gloss.
So
Yeah.
I edit Moonray, and I only mentioned that because I was talking with Sean when we got the copies in,
Yeah.
and I was telling him, I've been around in some sort of tangentially related, even if it's from just cheering from the sidelines, all of Brandon's books since King City. And this is the best his stuff has ever looked. And he's like, look, I have been reading all of Brandon's stuff since King City, and I've thought about how would I do this to the maximum effort of production, and what kind of
Mm-hmm.
paper would I put it on? How would I process the color? That's one of the brilliant things. I mean, I love working with Sean. He's honestly one of the best publishers in the industry, period. And I think it's because part of it is because he has that mindset of, again, like the whole tactile experience. I mean, how many comics do you get these days that are printed on the same kind of paper that seem completely disposable, where the colors are
Yeah.
saturating differently per page, and then you look at something, whether it's something one color like House on Fire or something full color like Moonray, and you can tell that the effort was. And I don't think it's just weirdos like us. I mean, I think even if a reader isn't conscious of it, they can pick up on it. Just that
Yeah.
the things of higher value than just production wise than something else. So yeah.
And I think it's almost an advantage of because I think oftentimes working with bigger publishers is thought of as like a better thing on all fronts. But there is a nice thing. It seems like an advantage of doing more indie stuff sometimes is a more of a curation of how your book is going to look and it being like a unique object as opposed to just kind of a book that looks like 50 other books that are all printed the exact same way.
Yeah, and yeah, it's awesome. I was really happy with it. It was finally like this was the first thing that I've made that I was like, wow, this is like an actual real big book. This is a book that it it looks like a legitimate book. It's got a nice spine on it. When I see it in the store, it makes me happy. Like I've seen an indoctrination trade at like Second and Charles, and I like was like, should I buy it just to kind of hide it from people? And like, that book, like all the spreads were broken. Like they didn't look at the proof and like notice that the spreads were all broken. And so each issue of that book had a double page spread in it, and every single one of them was broken in the trade.
Huh.
And so,
Okay.
so like you'd have the left hand page of the spread be on the right hand page, and then the left hand, and it was the most like upsetting. Like so that again, that was one of those things where it was like, this is just that stopped me from making them for a while. But not the spreads. The art also wasn't great because I just do it anyways. But that I also did a lot of that digitally, and I think that also hurt me, was trying to do it, trying to be an artist that I'm not, with that. And that was, you know, I think that there's a lot of pressure to do this like photo real type of style.
Sure.
And some people do a really great job at it, but I don't see why we should all have to do, like, I don't think that everyone should feel like they have to do that.
Certainly. 1 second. I'll be right back.
You have any thoughts, Joe? Sorry, Brandon, I've been just rambling.
No, I mean, I've just been enjoying it. It's funny because Brandon and I were just talking with someone about like, their claim was that people weren't talking comics enough in comic situations, right? Not enough about craft. They were talking about industry or whatever, gossip, blah, 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 blah. Honestly, for me, it's just really refreshing to kind of be sitting down. Like, one of my favorite convention experiences ever was really early on. I think it was 2003, 2004. And I was volunteering to help Larson out with the image booth at the time. And so I was hanging out with him, and we sat down, and then this is not named, it is, I guess it is name dropping, but Bruce Timm sits down to talk to him, and they just talk about treasury editions for like 3 hours. And it's like, that's my favorite kind of stuff at cons, man.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of stuff that, I mean, I don't know. I personally, now that I'm kind of getting plugged back in again to the comics, whatever stuff online like that, that's what I'm craving, So
Yeah.
point being, it's a blessing to hear you guys talk about the kind of thing in the same sort of light. So.
Well, I haven't been able to talk like the interviews I did for House on Fire like were very, people wanted to talk about the newsiness of it or whatever, like the COVID implications of it, and so I didn't really get to, like, even when I, not to name drop, but when I went on Bret Easton Ellis's podcast, like I thought that was extremely intimidating. He was very nice, but it just was intimidating. But like talking with him about the book, like it also wasn't really a craft discussion.
Yeah, and he specifically talked about how, because I did him as well, and he's like starting the interview being like, I don't like comics, just
Yeah.
And so like I think the great thing about your stuff is your work transgressed that a little bit, and you can actually talk about the subject matter with him.
Yeah. I wanted to hear him. Like, I don't think he taught. Like, I don't think that he could have he could grasp Moonray.
Yeah.
Like,
I mean, no disrespect to him. I just think that he doesn't. I think he's a very intelligent writer who just does not really get comics as a general thing, and Moonray is kind of past. It's like, like, maybe not to sound too masturbatory, is I hope I'm making kind of advanced reader comics.
Well, I think it is. It's a different kind of advanced comics reader comic.
Yeah, it's
like
going
you
weird.
need to understand how comics function to read Moonray. Like You need to be able, like, you need to be comics literate, um, in I think a different way. In that, like Moonray, you have to pay attention to things, and you cram it full of background details and stuff. I still think that the one of the that page that you shared from Volume 2 where you have that throwaway character in the background of like all these heads, and I'm like, this is such a deep like metaphor for the internet. If there are all these heads saying lie, 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 as I bet you probably don't show them again, but like it's such a cool little like there's that whole book is dotted with things, and I think I was
Oh,
flipping through it at Mocha, and there was I can't remember what, but some of the stuff that you were sort of peppering throughout that book were starting like us, like all these background details that were tying things together. But like you kind of need to. I don't know. You have a specific graphic language that people need to like pick up on and figure out, and then I'm just asking you to pause in the drawings for a little longer. Like if it was a film, this shot would last for 30 seconds or something like
yeah,
that. So I need you to give it some space.
Yeah, I think you
yeah,
do end up training the reader though. Like you shared with me that you liked Ringside, and that was one thing that I always kind of struggled with was I would want people to really sit with it, and
Mm-hmm.
obviously you don't get to control that as much in comics. The exception being, I really do feel like double page spreads are a great way to do it. Like we keep going back to the one of the environment and then the bang. We would
Mm-hmm.
do that at Ringside a lot to kind of because Kirby was a big influence on me, and like obviously with his double page spreads, it's this huge bombastic crazy thing, and we would do that of course, but like I really felt like they were a great tool to help you sit in that moment and just be there for a little bit. And so when you have a book like House of Fire or Ringside that's relatively quiet, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like where the single gunshot is a huge deal,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, it does require it. It's an advantage that it puts it on the reader to be like, are you if you're willing to sit with this book, there's something for you there. It's like you can hand someone like, you know, the greatest cognac ever made and they can sit there and really enjoy it and experience it, or they could just chug it, in their minivan on the way to go crash into a stop sign and not appreciate it. Something that Matt was saying earlier that I want to touch on again is the idea of your style developing almost out of there's a lot of conversation online about especially younger artists kind of finding their styles, and I feel like a lot of what you're kind of alluding to is you're finding your storytelling and your illustration style out of necessity, almost like what works to propel the story rather than like trying to be uh fit something that sells something or what other people want.
Yeah. I mean, I think that I don't know. I don't think I sent you this PDF, but Joe, I don't know if you got looked at that Crimson PDF that I
Mm-hmm.
sent you, but like I was trying, I was trying a lot with like the pen and trying to be very like specific, and I just was like fighting against what I was like wanted, what felt more right to me, and I think the whole style thing is such a people put like way too much thought into it when it should just be like, well, kind of like do what you've. I feel like when you land on it, it just feels natural to you, and that was
Sure.
sort of when I was once I was inking House on Fire. It was like each page, like again, I timed it because I wanted to because I had told Sean I was like, yeah, I kind of finished inking a page in like an hour. And he's like, no way. And I said, no, I'm pretty sure that's how long it takes. And so I like timed myself. And I was like, yeah, no, it's like an hour. And then like uh, that's like to me that's when I felt like, oh, this is this is how I'm supposed to draw.
Mhm.
And um, slowing down has some benefits of tightening it up. So like I shouldn't be finishing a page in an hour, um, but I think if I'm laboring over something for a really long time, then it's not working because that's just not you know in like I can't like the pens always clog up on me and like the lines skip and I think it's like a lefty problem maybe, but um, I don't know. I think a lot of young artists also are like so concerned with this sort of, and it was the biggest thing that's holding me back is like you're concerned with this industry thing.
Yep.
Like I need to break in, and it's like comics is such an accessible medium to express yourself in. Like it's the easiest way, or not easy, but you know, like I do video production for work, and that stuff is all a team thing, and it takes a lot of time, and it's complicated, and you know, you need cameras, and then you need people to be in front of the cameras, and you know, it's a lot. Whereas like comics, if you would like to express yourself and put a story out there, you can. You're not guaranteed financial success with it, but like that doesn't exist with any creative medium. So why I think that some of it's like an expectation thing of like like why, you know, there's no entertainment medium that promises you a gig. Like it doesn't exist, you know? So or success for your like in your book.
Or like what great work that's permeated through time was the result of like I mean, you know, look, there are exceptions for that. Like Kirby talks a lot about how his job was to sell books, right? Mm. And so he would do the best thing that he thought could sell books. Like he saw that romance magazines were selling on the newsstands, so we should be doing romance comics. So like I get that, but he still like told the most, in that case, like a Simon and Kirby thing, but like the most Kirby thing possible. And then that, you know, that worked. I mean, and like Fantastic Four was a reaction to Justice League. Like I get it. But I say this with a lot. I mean, I did this. I mean, I think every young creator does to a certain degree. I mean, at least in the ecosystem I was in of like guys coming into Image Comics, you know, wanting to do the next Walking Dead or I guess later on Saga. That was a little bit after my time. But anyway, yeah. So, I mean, I don't know. But then the guys who just do the work, I mean, I could feel it with this book. And despite knowing you a little bit now, that you just had to tell this particular story. It wasn't a thing where you're like, I know what my Netflix pitch will be. Like, I'll sell this comic book. And it's like, nobody wants that. Nobody wants the Netflix, like the Netflix comic. It was like, just make your thing. And it's funny because like the person whose comics were bought by Netflix, like Mark Miller, like you talk to Mark Miller, like that guy just loves making the things he makes. You know?
Yeah.
I assume there's, I mean, I don't know him well enough to know this, but I would assume that there certainly is a level of like what's exciting to people, what people actually would want. But you can tell he just loves making that particular thing. Versus I think what you're alluding to, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but the guys who are like trying to calculate the things that people will actually want and then make that thing instead of the thing that they actually speaks most to them.
Well, I think that's the mistake that people make when they're first trying to make comics. Is like they're so focused on like, I'm trying to sell a thing, and it's like whatever. Like,
I mean, you are in a way, you know what I mean? But like, you can't make that your, like, I think like, I've been thinking a lot lately about like your personal hierarchy of ideals when you're creating things. And like, I go on this big rant and I'll do the very short version of it, which is people complain about politics in comics a lot, right? It's like, that's not really what you're complaining about. What you're complaining about is that in the hierarchy of ideals and the creation of the thing, people are putting politics above craft or whatever, you know? It's like you look at Frank Miller's Dark Knight Returns and it's like, yeah, that's a comic that if you know what politics were like in 1985 or 86, like you know what he's talking about. But craft and telling a great story were still put higher up on this hierarchy of ideals for what his art was.
It's not like he avoided it. I mean, Reagan's literally in the comic.
Yeah. But his craft is so good and his storytelling is so good that's not the thing that supersedes everything else.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, House on Fire is a political work, but it's like, in my mind, there's a distinction. It's a lowercase p political, and the thing that I wanted it to be is I didn't want to tell someone what they needed to walk away from the story with. And I think that is the problem. I think that when people complain about the politics in comics is that they feel like they're being told the thing to think and the thing to walk away from the story with. Mm-hmm. Whereas and it's not the thing that they agree with is what they're being told. And I think that if you actually want to make people think about a subject in any kind of way, you can't tell them, you can't like prescribe the answer. Like that doesn't make that's not compelling.
Yeah, because
Or,
even
or you can't.
being
Yeah,
sold something you agree with in a way that it can be annoying, you
I
know.
hate it.
Yeah, I mean, House on Fire, I think you really capture. I mean, it feels like you're processing the emotions, like how do I how do I express these feelings that I'm having more than anything? So it's almost like if someone like they could disagree with specifics on what their perception of your message is, but it's almost like they'd have to disagree with you having emotions. Yeah.
Well, there was one review and that was written about the book on Soulrad, I think was that was the site, and he was very critical of the his perception of the politics of the book, and it was funny because to me, when I read that book, the review, which was very complimentary of the art and the storytelling, so it was I thought I took it nicely, but I thought the other thing that was funny was that his takeaway on the narrative of it was more telling on his, to at least this was my reading of it, was more told on his his emotional reaction to the same events in that you know he was his review was sort of trying was justifying like his he was arguing against like an argument that he saw in the book that I don't actually think is in the book.
Okay.
You know what I mean? Like the
Yeah.
book evoked these arguments that he had had with other people, and so he was arguing that against the book, which I thought was interesting. Um, and I thought that was kind of like, well, yeah, like to me that actually was a negative review, but I thought that it was a positive reflection of the book, and that like he had to think about something, and that's all I want people to do. I would like people to read it and think.
Yeah, it's a good way to put it. Yeah, and it is interesting. It's reminding me there's be YouTube movie reviewers that I'll watch sometimes to just gauge what a movie is, and if they hate a movie, sometimes I'll be like, "Oh, this is for me." And maybe it goes back to the idea of art is not it does not need to be universal to work. And you don't have to agree with the work, but the amazing thing, and this goes back to kind of the artist's hand and showing yourself in the work is like if you do really connect with something and you find something like House on Fire connected with me and Joe, just like it's so nice when something resonates with your emotional experience or something. And I think that's why we need to have more work that's just like this is how I feel about this, and hopefully someone can, it's a message in a bottle to someone that connects with this. And I think it's a big, it's possible you have guys like Miyazaki that can sing to the whole crowd and click in a bunch of places, but like I don't think that should be the goal, and I don't even think that's the goal for him because he's a fascinating creator, and that his work sings to everyone, it connects with them, but when they talk to the guy, he pisses everyone off. You know?
But and his work is very specifically him too, right? Like
Yeah, yeah.
he's a specific guy, I think. Um, yeah, I don't know. I feel like people are making more of these kinds of things though. Like I picked up a couple things at Mocha that felt very like this is you putting whatever you are out on the page, and like
That's cool.
that's cool. Like um and I like finding that kind of work is and that's what's exciting me now. Like I think I read I, don't know, I read too many things, but I read that Blood of the Virgin by Sammy Harcum,
Okay.
which was coming out in Crickets, and I thought that was really good. It was because it was just like it was a small drama. Like there's not like a lot of stakes to it or anything, but it was like, oh, this is like it was about a marriage collapsing, and the guy's an editor, film editor, and it was, and then there was a history of film in Hollywood part, side story. But it was a good like again, like there's so many more examples now. I think that we're seeing of comics that are sort of breaking out of the superhero mold that we don't, you know. But then they also feel like they're in this. We're building this new. We need to build this new readership of like people not expecting genre things from comics, and I don't know how else to say
Sure.
it other than genre things, but like um I love like all of the the 70s films and that sort of stuff where it's sort of, they're very like, they don't feel like they're easy to box into something, you know? I don't know, they feel real and like lively in that way. And they're not like perfect. And I think that was something that you were saying, Joe, and that was something that I respond to a lot more with, like with the art, is that like, you turn on a TV show or a movie today, and usually you look at it and you're like, oh, yeah, like, yeah, it looked great. Like the cinematography was great. Like it was well shot, but you don't remember a thing about it.
Correct.
Other than like, yeah, aesthetically it was perfect, but like, I don't know, there's nothing there to it, and that's I think what I think people need to push back on, like, is like make interesting things, like even if they're not perfect.
Yeah, the I completely agree with you, and we've talked about this a little bit in the past, but I do feel like not so much that the readership needs to be built, but like it just needs to be like reconnected with again. Like I know they're there. Like when I talk with people one on one or online or on the Vast Vision Discord or whatever, like people are hungry for it. Be it it's the work, they just need the work. And I think that's why like Brandon and I were talking about Phillips and Brubaker the other day, and like I don't know that their work, maybe I'm just not connected with it, gets like the noise online, but man, like it sells like crazy, and I don't even read what they're about anymore. I just buy them. I just have it in my comic shop. I'm just like, anything Sean Phillips and Ed Brubaker do, just put it in my box and I'll read it. And it's just so wholly them that it could be about anything and I don't care. I'm just stoked to read
But
it.
you do know it's always kind of about the same thing.
Well, a little bit, but I mean,
I love their books.
yeah.
I love their books.
Yeah, I
There's
wish
not
I had.
not going to be a crime in there.
Yeah, there'll be a crime in there,
Yeah.
but it's just like the different
Love crime.
perspective is so different. Like Where the Body Is felt so different than Reckless, which felt so different. I mean, I could tell it was by the same guys, and that's what's cool about it. But I don't.
To me, Where the Body was like the biggest experiment they've done, in the sense of like they had like a documentary trope part of it, which I thought was neat.
Yeah.
It was a big stretch. There was a comic that I actually read that was a literal documentary as comic book. It was about a homeless boxer in Russia,
Interesting.
and called Stranik, uh, um, which was another one of these books that I read prior to making House on Fire. That was also another like, oh wow, like this is a documentary as comic book. That's nuts.
I remember kind of comics. I don't know what you'd call it. The kind of Joe Sacco style comics
Mm-hmm.
of doing reporting through your illustration was catching on for a little bit for a while, and I don't know if
But
if it
the
passed.
thing that was different with this is just like a sort of a human, like a profile piece.
Okay.
And it was very like, it was abstracted. Like it wasn't like journalism. It was just a profile of a dude, but it was done in a very artful way. And it was, it's pretty wild.
That sounds really cool.
Yeah, would recommend if you can. I got it at Partners and Son, so that's they're a good Philly shop.
Certainly. So we should ask what you're kind of in the beginning processes of your next book, right? Just kind of reworking things.
I think I'm like 60 pages of layouts in. I think I
Is
want it to
there
be 150 pages.
okay?
That's the goal.
Do you remember the kind of crux that kind of got this new one started?
Yeah. I wanted to make something about my wife. So my wife and I moved to a home that's from like the 1700s, and there's a lot of just old home problems,
Mhm.
and just house. There's like lots of house, so whatever, yard shit, whatever. But I wanted to put like something about these domestic frustrations. You kind of constantly have these things falling apart, and at what point do you want to throw the towel in on the thing?
Right.
And then somehow this turned into like a frontier western, uh, and then maybe it's all the wars that are going on also seeped into it, and there's component of a sort of cyclical violence, and how, like asking this question of, can you ever get off this, like, sort of, again, like this, and what, we all end up in like, basically the protagonist of the book ends up at the receiving end of violence that was, started somewhere else, basically. And at what, can that end, is the other question of it. So there's a few things that are in there. We'll see how it all ties up.
Okay.
Carson kind of Carson threw a wrench at me that then had me rethink the whole ending. And I was originally going to have like a pleasant ending, and now it's going to be. I think it's going to end really brutally. So.
Okay. Do you feel like it like my idea about your work is you're kind of solving questions and solving problems in it. Are you
Yeah.
getting at any answers while you're making it, or are you still kind of in that?
It's funny because, like, my mother-in-law has told me this, where it's like, Matt's a really nice, normal, well-adjusted guy in real life, but if you read his books, he seems miserable. And I'm like, well, yeah, that's my, like, kind of like my therapy, is like I get out all of the, like, frustrations and stuff, and no one else has to deal with it. It just goes into comics.
Huh. It is interesting. It kind of goes back to what we were talking before about like interesting how the same work can connect differently with people because even there should be a German word for it or something about like the catharsis of when someone makes work dealing with struggles that you can relate to and
Mm-hmm.
it brings a sense of joy to you. It's just like an entirely like that's a really fascinating thing about your work is it feels to me like you're making these intense negative things that are just these vastly positive reading experiences.
Oh, I'm glad to hear that, because that's totally, like, you're currently reading Day Tripper, which was a book that, like, hit that nerve for me when I
Mm-hmm.
first read that. And uh, and what was the movie that I watched? No, but you get, I feel like to me, like, that's the point of, like, creating, and that's what you're always looking for when you're, like, you know uh, when you're watching something that you have any sort of like, there are obviously things that you read for pure entertainment, but then
Mm-hmm.
I think I'm always looking for that high of something that I really, really super deeply, like, you deeply, deeply connect with, because it just gets something that you are dealing with so deeply. And, like, again, with, like, Springsteen, you go through your tunnel of love phase, after nasty breakup or something, and then, like, that album is just, like, right there for you. Or when you're kind of sick of, you know, you're sick of being in your hometown and you're born to run, and you just kind of
Right.
listen, and they just deeply, deeply connect with you. And that's something that I would love for. I, I mean, I'm really flattered that House on Fire was like that for you guys, because I think that's what, I think that art is supposed, like, you want to aspire to that, to, like, create that deep connection. Um, and something that I've started thinking about more about with all the AI stuff and people's fear of AI, mine in particular, is that, and it's something that I think Carson's talked about, um, but it is that the thing that, to me, that I hope that AI can't replicate is that ability to create meaning with, like, art, because I do think that you need to, like, live something to do that.
Yeah,
And
there's a certain element of the author still matters, and in the same way that like you don't necessarily even need to know everything about them, but there is a value. Like in talking about uh, Brubaker and Phillips, there's a value in getting their next book and knowing kind of the language they're using and the quality they're using that
mm-hmm.
you'll it sells you on connection. I think that's a scary thing about kind of being a newer creator and putting stuff out is hoping that people will take a trust fall into connecting with your work.
Yeah. Well, and it's so hard. I think when you're younger too. Like House on Fire isn't a book I think that I could have made as like a 20-year-old. Like
Yeah.
it just wouldn't work. Like I hadn't lived anything at that point, and I think you have to kind of. I think comics, especially as a medium, requires some light, like some life to you.
Yeah.
Did we lose Brandon?
Yeah, it just texted me that he froze. But you know what? It's been almost 2 hours.
It is 10:30.
Yeah. That was fun, man. So we're left with this beautiful frozen image of Brandon Graham. Matt, I feel like we could keep talking, and you know what? We just should. You know, we're still building this rocket ship as we're flying it. So,
yeah.
Yeah, man. We'll have it back on.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, talk comics, and have you pick one, and we'll go from there. But anyway, for anyone listening, we are going to wrap this up. Thank you so much for joining us, Matt. Where can people find more about you and your work?
You can find House on Fire at wherever you buy books. You can find it at the Living the Line website. My website's mattjbat.com. I'll plug my work website, freethepeople.org, if you want to see the video production work that I do. But those are the things.
Okay, right on. All right, ladies and gentlemen, till next